Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we are solving Enterprise Paper 1 Variant 2 of May-June 2024. Before we start the paper, make sure that you have read the appropriate insert. Now let's begin. Question 1. Leo was enterprising whilst employed in the cafe. Define the term external stakeholder. Now this is something that we learned in Unit 1 under stakeholders, and there are basically two types of stakeholders: internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. Internal stakeholders are people who are directly affected by the business, and these could be managers, employees, shareholders, etc. And external stakeholders are people who are indirectly affected by the business and could be customers or competitors. Now let's write our answer. Now, since this is one of the very common definitions, I would recommend that you directly memorize this as is. Part B. Explain why the cafe manager could be a stakeholder in Leo's proposed future enterprise. Now, the enterprise that Leo was about to propose was about selling a booklet about the instructions on how to use coffee grinds. And if the booklets are sold, the revenue also goes to the cafe. The cafe manager is going to be a stakeholder because he's being directly or indirectly affected by Leo's idea. So then we can phrase our answer something like this. Now let's move on to the next question. Part C, state 2 enterprise skills. Enterprise skills is something that we covered in Unit 3, and there are 16 enterprise skills that we have to know. But since we only have to state 2, we can state any. I'll pop up a list right now of all the enterprise skills you could mention though. Part D. Explain one way that you have been enterprising. Use an example to support your answer. This again is a 3-mark question, which means we first have to identify one way that we were being enterprising, explain it, and then show application to our own experience. Now this doesn't have to be about your enterprise project itself, so you can answer based on anything. So for example, that you used technology for learning, or you used technology to develop a new skill, or you thought creatively, or you solved a problem somehow. Anything works. It doesn't have to be about your enterprise project, as long as you identify a way you were being enterprising, which again means you were applying one of the 16 skills that I showed you before, and then you explain it, and then you show how you used it as well. So your answer could look something like this. Okay, so I think that's enough. Let's move on to the next question. Question number 2. Leo thought that his enterprise idea could benefit many stakeholders. Select the most appropriate word to complete each of the sentences about SWOT analysis. Before we look at the question, I just want to mention SWOT analysis is something that we learned in Unit 4. Now, using these 4 bullet points, we have to fill in the blanks. Financial limitations are dash factors affecting an enterprise. Financial limitations are internal factors affecting an enterprise. Legislation and regulations are dash factors, external factors. Now let's move on to the next question. Explain one way Leo's enterprise idea could have a positive effect on stakeholders other than customers. Going back to Unit 2 here, they haven't mentioned whether they're specifying internal or external stakeholders. So we could take the community, the government, suppliers, lenders, all of that into consideration when we answer this question. Now, one of the stakeholders that we could take is Leo, because earning more profit for him is going to help him pay for his education. Another stakeholder could be the cafe owner. Since the cafe grounds are not being thrown away, it reduces the cafe waste, which needs to be removed. So any stakeholder will do. I think I'll write about Leo. Okay, now let's move on to the next question. Define the term customer satisfaction. Customer retention or customer satisfaction is something that we learned in Unit 8, Market and Customers, and you can find the exact definition in my notes, which will be linked in the description below. Customer retention or customer satisfaction is the extent to which customers are pleased with the products or service provided by an enterprise. Or you could say it is the measure of how well products or services of an enterprise meet the customer expectations. Explain one method you used or could have used to measure customer satisfaction in your enterprise project. Now, there are a number of methods used to measure customer satisfaction, and to answer this question specifically, I'm going to be in the hypothetical scenario where my enterprise project was a partnership that made bracelets. Now, to answer the question itself, there are methods of measuring customer satisfaction and retention, which you can actually find in my notes as well. They will be linked in the description. But just as an example, which I think is the easiest way to answer a question like this, is the use of surveys. So I'm going to write my answer based off of that. Now, mentioning the method used is going to give me 1 mark, so the survey gives me 1 mark. And then the explanation is to ask customers for feedback, which gives me another mark. And finally, the application, to where I said this helped us see what they liked about our bracelets, gives me the 3rd mark. Question number 3. Leo decided to calculate the potential profits because he expected the manager would need this information to include in his financial records. State 2 financial records usually produced by an enterprise. Now this is from Unit 6, Finance, and for enterprise you only need to know 3 financial records, which are the income statement, budget, and cash flow forecasts. Now you could write any 2 of those over here. Alright, let's now move on to part B. For each of Leo's ideas, he produced an estimate of the costs and potential revenue. These are shown in table 3.1. Calculate using the table 3.1 the profit made by selling 100 booklets. So the cost of printing 100 booklets is only $5, and he's selling each booklet for 50 cents, which means if he sold all 100 booklets, he would make $50. Now this would be the total revenue, but they're not asking about the revenue, they're asking about the profit. And the formula for profit is mentioned in my notes, and since they're not exactly specifying gross profit or net profit here, it's just going to be the simple gross profit formula, which is profit is equal to revenue minus the cost of goods. So since this is the revenue, it's going to be 50 minus, and over here we can see that the cost has been given, which is $5. So 50 minus 5, which should give us the profit of $45. Okay, part 2. Calculate using table 3.1 the profit made by selling 10 bags of coffee logs. When you're reading this table, make sure you don't get confused by the wording, because each bag has 10 coffee logs in it. This is because 10 bags would have 100 coffee logs in them, and 10 bags would mean you need 100 packaging material as well. So to calculate the total cost, it's going to be $10 plus $15, which is equal to $25. And then the selling price per bag is $8, which means if we were to sell 10 bags, it would be 10 multiplied by 8, which is equal to $80. Then again, we're going to apply the same formula that we did over here and minus the revenue by the cost, which gives us $55 in profit. Part 3. Calculate the difference in profit between option 1 and option 2. Now I'm pretty sure everybody passed year 1 math, so it's just going to be $55 minus $45, which is equal to $10. Alright, question number 4. Leo is sure that if he sells a large amount of coffee logs, he will be able to make this a profitable enterprise. There is a large amount of planning to do. State 2 suitable aims other than making profit for Leo's enterprise. Now, aims is something that we covered in Unit 7 Business Planning, and aims are broad, long-term goals or visions an individual or organization strives to achieve. Aims could include survival, profit maximization, increasing market share, or maximizing growth, or maximizing sales. So any of those will be fine as long as it is something that is an aim and not an objective. That is something students could get confused in, the difference between aims and objectives. Of course, if you want to learn a bit more about that, you can find more information in my notes, which will be linked in the description. Okay, part B. Explain how one aim of your enterprise project affected its activities. Use an example to support your answer. Now you could use any of the aims we already talked about in part A. What's important is that you identify the effect of the aim, you explain it, and then you give an application to your own enterprise project as well in order to get all 3 marks. Now you could say that your aim was to reduce pollution, and the way that you'd frame your answer is by saying, my aim was to reduce pollution, which made my total costs higher, which made the selling price of my product higher as well, which led to fewer sales, but the customers were happy since they weren't contributing to polluting the environment. Or you could have the aim of establishing your business or increasing sales, and the way you'd phrase your answer for that is by saying, I wanted to increase my sales, which made me spend a lot more time working on my enterprise project because I made and ran my own social media page. And then to get the third mark for application, you just mention what your enterprise was about. The example I've been using is for selling bracelets. So the way I'd phrase my answer for that is by saying, I wanted to establish my enterprise or increase sales, same thing, which made working on my enterprise project a lot more time consuming because I made and ran my own social media page about bracelets. Now, those are just examples you can use to frame your own question. I'm going to be taking customer satisfaction as my aim to write my answer about. All right, let's move on to the next question. State 2 ways that writing an action plan could assist an enterprise. Now, an action plan is something that we covered again in Unit 7, Business Planning, and is a detailed outline of specific tasks. And we can use the knowledge we know about the importance of an action plan to answer this question, which means there's a few things we could mention here. We can mention how it identifies all the important activities, or in other words, it reduces wasted time. It helps in identifying problems in advance. It allocates who is responsible for each task, or in other words, helps identify people who have not done their work. And lastly, it acts as a checklist. So any of these points would be fine. Just make sure you don't repeat the same thing in different words, which could be very confusing at times. But just think about what is the reason for you stating something, and then make sure that the second part of your answer isn't for the same reason. Alright, let's go to part D now. State 3 sources of help and support available to an enterprise. Before we answer, help and support is of course from Unit 9, Help and Support for an Enterprise. And since it's not specifically mentioning formal sources or informal sources of help and support, we could mention any. Of course, other answers do include financial institutions, banks, charities, business networks, teachers. You could mention any of those. Those are all correct answers. Let's move on to question number 5. Leo completed some market research. When he decides which option to choose, he will need to complete some marketing. Explain one problem with the method of market research that Leo used. Market research is something that we learned in Unit 8, Market and Customers. Now, in order to answer this question, we need to identify the problem with the research, and then the application to the research that Leo used, and then explain why it's a problem. So Leo's market research was limited in two different ways. One was that his research was very limited when he was doing primary research because he only asked Elizabeth, and the results from that could be biased. Another problem is that he only used one website which could have been outdated, and recently problems with the ideas might have been found, but he wouldn't know that because he only went to one website. So you could mention either of these points because they're both correct. Define the term marketing. Marketing, again, is something that we learned in Unit 8, Market and Customers, and is a big part of that chapter. Marketing is the communication between an enterprise and its potential customers. Or you could say that it's anticipating, identifying, and satisfying customer needs, which I think is the definition that we all learned. Now, since this is a 2-mark question, they are expecting a precise definition. Simply saying that it's raising awareness for a product or service, or it improves the image of the enterprise, is only going to get you 1 mark and not 2 marks because that isn't a precise definition. The precise definitions are one that I've written right here, and another could be the communication between an enterprise and its potential customers. Now let's move on to the next question. Explain one factor you considered when choosing the appropriate marketing communications used in your enterprise project. I think one factor that all the students doing this could mention is cost. We don't have unlimited cost, or else we would go above and beyond to market our brand. So I think that is something very easily that we could answer. You could answer about the availability or suitability for the product, or the suitability for the target market, or your time. Those are all factors that you consider when deciding how to market your product. Instead of saying we had limited funds, you could also exactly mention how much money you had. So that could be $10, $20, or whatever currency you use in your country. Part D, justify one method of marketing communication that would be suitable for marketing either the booklets or the coffee logs. Now, of course, there are a number of marketing communication methods. I'll list them up on the screen right here, and you can decide which one you think is best. But I think the most suitable for Leo's business would be something small and something not too costly. So maybe samples or word of mouth or social media, something along those lines. Because going for magazines, billboards, posters, all that is going to be a bit more costly for Leo. And since he is a student, he might not be able to afford all of that. Okay, I think that answers it pretty well. Question 6. Leo is writing a proposal for the booklet idea. He intends to use this proposal when explaining the booklet idea to the cafe manager. Analyze the importance of careful planning for the success of Leo's meeting with the cafe manager. You should consider 2 reasons in your answer. Now, in order to secure 10 marks in this answer, you have to include 3 things. Number 1, you have to identify the types of planning. So that would include business plans, action plans, and research. Number 2, you have to identify what are the steps of planning. And then number 3 is you have to give the benefits of planning itself. Now, in order to answer this question, we really have to think about what the purpose of planning is and what Leo is trying to achieve from this meeting. If you think about it, planning is going to allow Leo to put in the best information forward, which will help prove his points to the manager. The manager is going to be more likely to agree to the proposal. That's what Leo wants. So planning is going to allow Leo to put the best evidences forward to prove why his enterprise is going to be successful. It's going to mean he's more confident because he's more prepared for the meeting. And it's also going to allow him to prepare for arguments and counter arguments with the manager. Now, what I've just mentioned are 3 reasons why it's so important for Leo to plan for this meeting. But we only have to mention 2 and show really good analysis of them as well. Now this over here is a small introductory line that I have written. It's not necessary to write, but I thought it would be a good way to start in order to get into the flow of writing the question. Next, I've written the importance of planning right in the first paragraph, and then I've further explained how that planning could occur through business planning or action planning, and then what that would make the manager think of Leo's enterprise and of Leo, and basically the effect of that as well. Okay, I have started by giving a small sentence of the main objective of the meeting. And then my first paragraph is the first reason. And then I have listed the second reason in my second paragraph. And then I have ended the answer with a third paragraph simply stating the benefits and the importance of careful planning in general. Now you can use the structure of my answer to answer your own question in your own words. This is just an example of what your answer could look like. Part B. Leo has 2 enterprise ideas. Option 1, producing booklets for the cafe to sell. Option 2, setting up his own enterprise selling coffee logs. Evaluate which of these ideas you would recommend Leo would choose. Justify the option chosen, explaining why you reject the other option. Evaluating means good analysis and then providing advantages, disadvantages, and then a conclusion. In order to answer this question, you would have to go through the insert and really find what would be the advantages and disadvantages of option 1, and then what would be the advantages and disadvantages of option 2. Now let's begin writing our answer. Now here I've listed 3 advantages of option 1 into one paragraph, and then I'm going to mention 3 disadvantages in a separate paragraph for option 1. Just so that it's easier to differentiate between the two, I'm going to be writing the disadvantages in red. Now here I have listed the disadvantages of option 1. Now we're going to begin writing the advantages and disadvantages of option 2 on the next page. Now here I have listed the advantages for option 2, and just like option 1, I'm going to be writing the disadvantages of option 2 in red. I think we can tell there's a clear winner on which option Leo should choose for his enterprise. Now finally, here is the conclusion on which option Leo should choose. Question number 7. Now consider your enterprise project. A. During your enterprise project, you followed the 6 stages of the enterprise process. Analyze the importance to your enterprise project of 1. Monitoring progress, and 2. Evaluating success and failures. Use examples to support your answer. Now, question 7 is always a question where you get asked about your own enterprise project. And unfortunately, I'm not running my own enterprise project at the moment, so I won't be able to answer this question precisely. Instead, I'll be providing you a very good framework to answer this question yourself. And it's the same with part B of this question as well. Now here, I've written the framework for you. Let me break it down. The first thing is going to be a 1-line introduction, just saying that you use the 6 stages of the enterprise process and that monitoring progress and evaluating success and failures was very important in your enterprise project. Then you're going to start answering the first bullet point. How you're going to do this is by first giving a definition of what monitoring progress is. Right after that, you follow it up with the importance of monitoring progress. Now, how you're going to do this while showing good analysis is by stating the importance and then following that with a good explanation and then with the example or impact on your own project. This could be something like monitoring allowed our enterprise to compare actual performance versus planned targets, identify problems early, and then saying this is important because early action can be taken and resources like time, money, and labor are not wasted. And then whatever point you state, you have to link it with your own enterprise project in order to gain a high mark. Right after that, you're going to start with your next bullet point, which is evaluating successes and failures. You're going to be answering it in the exact same way as you answered the first one by first giving the definition of what evaluating successes and failures mean, and then showcase the importance of evaluation with good analysis by following the same structure as before. Now, if you answer this question well, you can easily obtain a high 8 to 10 mark. Part B. There are many sources of finance available to enterprises. Evaluate the potential impact on your enterprise project of 2 sources of finance you used or could have used. Use examples to support your answer. Okay, now here is the structure on how to answer question 7 part B. Since this is an evaluation question, that means they're usually going to give you 2 things to compare. That means you have to list the advantages and disadvantages of both and then draw to a justifiable conclusion. The first thing you're going to do is state both sources of finance. Then you're going to clearly identify the source of finance that you are talking about and then give the positive impact and the negative impact. Now, why I made those capital is because people may simply give the advantages or disadvantages of the source of finance, but that's not what they're asking you for. They're asking you about the impact that it would cause on your enterprise project. In other words, the effect it would have on your enterprise project. So they don't want to know that you use your pocket money and that way you had more control over the money you spent. They want to know how using your pocket money helped other parts of your enterprise. You're going to do the same thing with the second source of finance and make sure that you're always linking it to your own enterprise project if you want the marks. Once you link it to your own enterprise project, that shows that you understood what the question was and is a part of good analysis. Now, step 4 is comparison. You're going to compare your first source of finance with your second source of finance in terms of cost, risk, and suitability. Explain why one of the sources that you used or could have used was better in terms of cost, risk, and suitability for your enterprise project. Number 5 is the conclusion, where you state which source of finance was or could have been a better source. And that is how you're going to be answering question 7 part B. Now that is the end of your past paper. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe.